how we summarize. Texas took the heart and soul of A&M in their backyard. That game was never even close, and A&M never could sniff. Even when they did, they had no chance. Then also in the Big 12, we now finally know who it's going to be after so many different scenarios with Arizona State, Iowa State. You had the Michigan win against Ohio State. So much to get to. And let's start with Iowa State, Arizona State surviving, and that doesn't mean that they survived because they barely won. They are in after what was 1 week after another of crazy in the Big 12.
Yeah, it was a crazy week. Arizona State and Iowa State, though, they took care of their business. Arizona State and Ken Scadaboo, in particular in the first half, just put Arizona right out of it. Iowa State had a brawl in Farmageddon on their hands, which we fully expected because that's what Farmageddon is, and both those teams are good. And somebody's dinging somewhere.
Is the phone on? Is that yours, Craig?
Yeah.
When you take a week off, there are certain fundamental things we forget, right?
Yeah. So anyway, both those games were great. I think that one of them was great. One of them was not great for Arizona, but the Farmageddon game was fantastic. Rocco Becht. Man, there's not many quarterbacks that you kind of want in this conference in the fourth quarter than a guy like Rocco Becht, who just seems to make plays and overcome the mistakes that they've made early on. He's a really good player. I mean, he's no Shedeur Sanders, but again, who is? He's just gutsy and gritty, and I think it sets up for a really great championship game, even though Arizona State, we just found out, will be without Jordan Tyson this week in that game.
Yeah, it was a terrific final weekend for the Big 12 and really competitive games. Congratulations to Arizona State and to Iowa State for booking their tickets, and that's a big deal for both programs. Arizona State leaving no doubts. It was still a very strange weekend, seeing teams that you should just be able to see like, hey, they win, they're in, and yet it was, hey, they win, but then they need this combination and this team has to win for them to be able to be in. It was just all really messy, and I wish it was a bit more clear-cut, which is part of the issue with having so many teams in a league and especially them not all playing each other. But that's just, I guess, something we're going to have to live with. But, you wish it was a little bit clearer and you could kind of follow the games a bit easier. But nevertheless, it panned out the way that we thought it might last week, which was the easiest scenario, which is Arizona State and Iowa State win, and then the right combination of other teams occurs to just make it those two. And so that's what happened, and here we are, and it ought to be a great game. But, yeah, Jordan Tyson being out is an absolutely massive blow for the Sun Devils. He's one of their 2-3 best players on that team behind Cam Scadaboo and wherever you want to rank him after that. So that's a major loss. And then on the Iowa State side of things, they were pretty much dead in the water. It felt like at least 3-4 weeks ago, and right things happened around them, and they won the games they needed to be in this spot where they can now make further history. They made history by winning 10 games for the first time ever on Saturday, booked themselves a shot for the Big 12 championship, and now have an opportunity to go and win that sucker for the first time ever. So, a little former Pac-12 and a little traditional Big 12, and ought to make for an interesting game in Arlington, although BYU, Colorado, others could have made it spicy as well, but here we are.
We'll hear a little bit from Dave Aranda at about 4 o'clock, an hour from now, on Baylor winning 6 in a row to close out. Some teams in the Big 12, depending on what the expectations were, had a really nice year. Some that maybe feel like they could be a little bit better, and some that are in a free fall, including West Virginia. Neil Brown, after all of up and down, after last year what looked like he did save his job, he's out. We'll have Jed Drenning on today at 4:30. He's their sideline analyst for West Virginia Radio. And Neil Brown is out at West Virginia in Morgantown.
I just think that there was no way that they could have gotten around this. Like what are you going to say? If you're Ren Baker, what are you selling to the fan base? This is a guy who, when you're mad about them consistently losing at home, said in a press conference, well, at least you guys are having fun at the game. And that's just – I don't know what Ren Baker would have been able to do. Well, because he could throw out the lines of, like, we don't know what the house settlement and revenue sharing and there's a lot in flux and buyouts and blah, blah, blah. You know what the fan base was going to say? So?
Yeah.
Like, that's the point there that they were. at. Neil Brown will get another head coaching job somewhere, and maybe that's a better fit, but he just could not get it going in Morgantown, and they need somebody to shoot some new life into that program. They've got a great fan base that's – Gary and I talked about in Triple Option earlier. There's not many, compare this to the North Carolina job, right? North Carolina, the best news about that job is that coach can hide a little bit, right? He can, once basketball season starts, he can go in the background and do what he wants to do. With West Virginia, they care about both sports equally. And so because of that, you're going to be out in the forefront. Yeah, they just need maybe a new voice.
I mean, I am curious to know if this was decided before Saturday or not, because if it was riding the line, then going out and getting your ass kicked 52-15 definitely tipped it over in the favor of let's fire Neil Brown. Mm-hmm. If they lose 24-20, is he fired? I don't know, but you lose by nearly 40 points, and that's one sure way to convince people who maybe need a little bit of a push in one direction or the other that, yeah, you do in fact need to make a change. So I know a lot of Mountaineer faithful are celebrating. There were plenty of people who wanted Neil Brown to do well, but it was just getting very loud and got to the point here towards the end of even when they won a game, they got bowl eligible, it was a negative. Oh, great, now he's perhaps got a chance to stay because they made the postseason. And you knew it just wasn't a situation that was really tenable, and it just felt like a change was needed to just reignite the fan base, to reunite the fan base in some ways, and just to kind of start over, because the Neil Brown tenure has had a good amount of mileage on it, but it's been pretty consistent in a way that's not great for longevity, which is pretty consistently middle of the road, and they need something a little bit more than that at this stage. So when Ren Baker got hired and they made the change at AD, you could have started the countdown clock. Neil Brown had plenty of rope after Baker's hiring to carve out a long tenure, but they just hovered right there in the middle, and that's not enough, and West Virginia fans have seen enough, and I think overall it's bittersweet because I do think Neil Brown's a good coach, but just that situation, and every time we talked about them this year, even after wins, it's like it just didn't feel right. So this makes all the sense in the world. Neil Brown will get a big paycheck, and he'll go, I'm sure, have teams knocking on his door to be an OC. I don't know how quickly he'll be a head coach again, but I'm sure that opportunity will come at some point as well, and they'll go hire a great football coach, maybe Jimbo Fisher, since that's the hot name that's being thrown out. I also saw Nick Saban thrown out. I've seen
That's where he went.
Seen it all,
Yeah.
So we'll see where they go. But I'm kind of excited, and I don't have skin in the game, but I'm kind of excited to see what they do now.
It's a West Virginia program that from 2005 to 2011 won 11 games 3 times, 10 games once. They won 9 a lot. They won 9 last year, but they've been kind of in a little bit of an up and down, middle of the road, as you said, funk since they won 10 games under Dana Holgerson back in 2016. And then UCF, another team that they blew a tire. Started off well, looked like they had a pretty interesting team that could make a run. Gus Malzahn leaving to become part of Florida State staff with Mike Norvell, and because of the Seminoles' awful year, they're stealing from others, as you do. You're in survival mode. Gus Malzahn, this to me it really was weird how they just went belly up this year. I thought they were going to be an 8, 9, 10 win team, but I was obviously wrong.
Well, defensively they were a disaster. Ted Roof was not the right hire. And Mike Bianchi of the Orlando Sentinel wrote this yesterday in response to all this, is that a lot of UCF fans saw 6 and 7 in the first year of the Big 12 as, oh, that was good because it was the first year in the Power Conference. They'd adjust to playing a bunch of teams they'd never seen before, and 6 and 7 was good. Gus Malzahn reacted to it in that he didn't think it was good. He didn't think it was a stepping stone. He thought it was bad. So what he did was he ripped everything kind of down to the rivets, brought in a ton of new transfers, flipped the roster, new coordinators, took back play calling and all these things. And none of those things worked out when really maybe he should have just built on it. And you kind of get the feeling when a coach does this, like Chip Kelly did last year from UCLA to Ohio State, that he doesn't want to do all the things that a head coach has to do anymore, which is more CEO stuff. Mike Norvell has to do the CEO stuff now. He cannot just get drilled down into the ball. They're 2 and 10. So What do you do? Like I said, they've got to take big swings. And this is a big swing. He didn't go outside of his tree necessarily because he was a GA for Gus at Tulsa in 2007, so he went back in. If he wants to keep a similar system but build off the guy who invented it, then Gus Malzahn's a great hire for them, and I think that's I like the big swing. Whether it works out or not, we'll see, but I do like the big swing.
You know what sucks? Florida State goes 2-10, and they're at the center of today again.
Yeah, well,
because they sucked at 2-10.
Yeah.
All right, Craig, your thoughts about Malzahn. Also, there were coaching changes, staff changes at Texas Tech. We'll get to that in just a second.
Yeah, I mean, for UCF, this is a big deal. I think a lot of their fan base wanted Gus Malzahn gone. I think that was evident as the season progressed. He started off 3-0. He finished 1-8 down the stretch. So pretty miserable season overall for UCF that had a spark of belief there at the beginning, but was absolutely awful for the last 9 weeks of the season in terms of every game but the Arizona game, which you won in blowout fashion. But we know Arizona's not the most impressive team in the world. And outside of that, just losses on losses on losses. So I think this is a situation, unlike West Virginia and Neil Brown, where I don't think Neil Brown necessarily wanted to leave. Gus Malzahn clearly saw the writing on the wall. UCF was probably already leaning in that direction, and it works out best for both parties. It's a clean break. Malzahn can go save face and say he didn't get fired, even though that was right around the corner. Maybe not this offseason, but certainly with another year like the one they just had. So that was already a ticking clock. He gets to reset that. You know, if Norvell has another year like this year, and that's actually more the norm, then, oh, well, you're back on the market again. And on the other side of things, UCF already feeling like this is probably not going to work out long term. They get to go ahead and just bite the bullet and get started on the new era. So I'm interested, just like West Virginia, to see the new faces that they bring in and then the new attitude that gets brought in with the new staff as well. But I think this was one of those jobs you looked at, like with the Big 12 in general and hot seats, it didn't look like there would be much activity. But these two jobs right here have gotten the ball rolling, and I think you look at just the way the seasons went, and they make sense for all parties involved. So I think this is a good thing for both Malzahn and UCF.
So West Virginia and UCF looking for a new head coach. Texas Tech is going to have changes on their defensive staff. Joey McGuire announcing that defensive coordinator Tim DeRuyter, who was the one who took almost all of the heat this year, and then also passing game coordinator, secondary coach, Marcel Yates, will not return. So they make changes on that staff. They had a nice run. There were a bunch of teams this year in the Big 12. In fact, I just had the note. 8 teams were 8-4 and better. 9 make it to a bowl game out of 16. Tech was 8-4, but boy, you look at what could have been for them. You look at what else could have been for them, and so Joey makes the staff change with DeRuyter.
Yeah, I mean, you had to do something with the way that defense played throughout the year. That was clearly their Achilles heel. A lot of other things to like about this team. Really great season, all said and done. 8-4 is a nice mark. That's taken another step forward. You can take another step forward if you win 9 for the first time under McGuire. So they're still tracking well, and obviously there's a couple of games that some fans will side-eye a little bit and say those should have been, or one of them, if not both, could have been different outcomes. But regardless, still a really solid year. And a really kind of almost quiet 8-4, because that's a good record, and yet I don't feel like they really got talked much about, maybe just because of the style of games and the way some of them were won and against who some of them were against. But I think dust settling, you're happy about where you landed, feel like you could have done a little bit more, but certainly beats the alternative, and now you're not wasting any time and going to make the changes to get this team better now and moving into next year. And I think they started at the clear weak link, and we'll see, who Joey goes after now, but that's going to be an exciting tracking or hire to track as well as who he goes to get on that defensive side of the football, and especially on that back end.
Ryan Walters, this is actually a couple of days old, out at Purdue. Mike McIntyre out at FIU. Those are a couple of coaching changes too. Here's one.
It was a terrible hire.
Yeah.
It was a terrible hire at Purdue, Ryan Walters. That didn't last long. That was not a good hire. They fired Graham Harrell.
Yep.
Try to make him the scapegoat in some ways earlier this year, and the offense didn't change at all. It was still god-awful. So, yeah, they just whiffed on that one from the get-go. He seems like a good coach, but that's just not the right time, right situation.
Replaced a legend, right?
Yeah,
Jeff
he'll have to go back to the drawing board, and I'm sure he'll be a hot commodity for another staff, but yeah, Purdue whiffed on that one.
Yeah, App State open as well.
Okay.
Today.
And did you say, was it another Savannah State or someone like a couple other schools?
Yeah, there's
that
other
opened?
smaller ones. But yeah, App State, Sean Clark out at App State.
The one thing Nebraska could do is play defense. They could also screw up a wet dream. They can. That's how they just don't know how to win, and they did that against Iowa. But Tony White, who remember last year, I believe it was UCLA that went after him and a couple of others, or maybe San Jose State wanted him. He is leaving along with Terrence Knighton to head to a school we just mentioned. They're not good, and so they're going to find people. And Tony White's a hell of a defensive coordinator, and Terrence Knighton, a defensive line coach for Matt Rule at Nebraska, are headed to Tallahassee.
Yeah, again, like the big swing, go out and get somebody, go outside your tree, bring in new ideas. You know, look, when you come from Memphis to FSU, you get the benefit of bringing your guys. Your guys go 2-10, then you've got to kind of go outside the tree a little bit. Defensively, clearly they did. Tony White, one of the best in the country. Terrence Knighton, really good. It's really interesting what this means for Odell Higgins, who's been the defensive line coach for 30 years, under Bowden, under Fisher, under Willie Taggart, and under Mike Norvell through 4 head coaches. And he was probably getting close to retiring. They might move him to a university role, but Terrence Knighton coming in and taking over that, and coordinators are going to bring in their guys. It will be interesting to see who Tony White and Gus Malzahn bring in to fill out that staff at FSU, who the only ones we know are the 3 that got fired and have now been replaced, or 2 of them been replaced, and then I don't know what happens with Odell Higgins, but I like the move. Again, but he had to take big swings, and they can't go this guy's an up-and-comer. No. To get the, they went out. Florida State as an institution went out and hung it out there for everybody to see and went 2-10. And then you can't just respond to 2-10 going like, oh, hey, you don't know about this guy from San Jose State, or, this is a dude from UNLV. They might wind up being great coaches, but to sell that to the fan base, you have to take big swings.
Craig, anything on Tony White leaving? Hell of a coach. Hell of a coach. Their defense was pretty good. Not always dominant. Indiana just beat them up in that one game, but every other game was every game other than that was very, very, very close. And of course, they're good at losing one-score games. We've had Casey Keeler on this show before at Sam Houston State. He is headed to go to Temple. He now becomes the head coach. He's been at Sam Houston State, done a hell of a job, won a national title there, and also at Delaware with the Hens. And so he takes the job in going up to the Northeast to be a part of Temple and the Owls football program.
Well, they've been kind of listless since Matt Rule was there, and that's several years ago at this point. So Stan Drayton, came over, and I thought that was a good hire at the time, but didn't work out very well. So they go back on the hunt, and I think this time I feel much better about the strength of this hire because we know Casey Keeler a little bit better and have seen him in action at Sam Houston. Did a great job there. I don't think you'll see anybody from the Sam side of things wishing him anything but best wishes and appreciation for the job that he did there with the Bearcats. So job well done, job well deserved, and I'm excited to see what he can go and do with that program. Not an easy place. But a hotbed of talent there in the Philadelphia area, but not the easiest place in terms of having all of the bells and whistles, but neither was Sam Houston, and he did a good job there. Now it's a little bit of a step up, so I think that's a really good hire for the Owls, and look forward to seeing what he can do.
I went to the chat room and asked Tech fans who they wanted to see leave, if it was DeRuyter or Kitley, because there's been some frustration with Kitley, although the offense put up big numbers, and everyone immediately responded with Tim DeRuyter, who is the defensive coordinator. Let's see here. Transfer portal. Oh, this is the Kenny Dillingham story. Dillingham, I like this young man. He has done a remarkable job. Should be getting votes for National Coach of the Year. I'm sure there are others, including Signetti, Monken, Dion, a couple of Kalani Sitake. He took 100% of his bonus. He got a $200,000 bonus for the 9 wins and spread that out among his staff, some getting between $5,000 and $10,000 bonuses. Didn't tell them about it. He's giving them his bonus. I thought that's the way to do it. Now, I bet they're probably not paid real well. That might change here with the year that they've had.
But still, that off the field staff for the most part is not that's your GAs, that's your quality control guys, and all that. That is awesome, and that that builds a lot of loyalty within a staff as well, and to do it without fanfare, and then to have, like, he wasn't. I think if Ken Dillingham had his way, we would not even be talking about this based on the way that he went about it. But sometimes it's hard to keep a secret. Like, hey, I just got a $10,000 bonus that I didn't expect, and it's because we got to 9 wins and he gave that to me. Taking care of your coach is an important part of keeping continuity.
Our friend Chris Cartman, who we got to know because of realignment, he's done a hell of a job covering the Sun Devils through that time period and also through this 10-2 season so far. Micah Hudson, 5-star wide receiver from Lake Belton High School, not far from where we are, plans to enter the transfer portal. I'm sure that he's going to get whatever he wants. It was always weird whether he was not a part of it or he was hurt or something was going on. It was always weird. I'm not surprised to see this. I have not yet reached out to his head coach, Brian Cope, at Lake Belton, because I've been pretty snowed under most of the day. But I got to figure out what's going on here, and I'm sure everybody has their own scenario of what happened. He was caught 8 passes for 123 yards. When you get a 5-star, unless maybe it's a quarterback, and even those guys get to play pretty quickly, and you don't play, something is weird.
Yeah, respectfully to Brian Cope, I don't think he really is going to shed any more clear light on what's happening other than a 5-star. Didn't get a lot of playing time during his freshman year, and he's going to get a bunch of opportunities outside of that. I think that's pretty clear what probably the main thing is with this whole scenario, because as you said, it was weird all the way through, but guess what? You land a 5-star. We saw the celebration on signing day last year. It was a really big deal for Texas Tech. It should have been. It was the first, 5-star signee and a big get for Joey McGuire and all of those things. But, ultimately, the reason I don't get super overmodulated about signing day is because I'm a reality and results guy. And so to land them is important. You got to do that first things first. But ultimately, it's about what they do. And everybody was wondering why Micah Hudson wasn't doing more. Like the first game of the year, why doesn't he have more catches? Where is he? What's he doing? And that was with the territory the moment you signed him. So as the season progressed and he wasn't getting more catches, more opportunities, sometimes wasn't even out there, it just raised more and more questions. And I know Joey and them, that had to be really annoying to have to constantly police that. But we also don't know what it was like behind the scenes. So it seems like it was just awfully frustrating because maybe he wasn't ready to play or maybe he wasn't doing the things necessary. But the outside world doesn't know that, so they're clamoring for where's the 5-star, where's the 5-star, and who knows what really went on behind closed doors. But I can't say that I'm surprised based on how the season went and all the questions that constantly surrounded his playing time. So I figure like he's probably had some pretty packed DMs over the course of the last few months, and he'll have plenty of suitors and plenty of money being thrown his way, so we'll see what he does wherever he goes next. But that's a blow for Texas Tech more from a perception standpoint than a result standpoint, because they're not losing anything football-wise that's tangible that we can feel right now. Like you can't say like, oh my God, what a loss for next year, because you didn't really see enough this year to know.
If he had 80, you'd be like,
crap. Or hell, 45.
It's a loss perception-wise because he's supposed to be really good, but like as far as what actually happened, it's tough to say how much they're really losing. But, yeah, it's a blow, like, ego-wise, I'm sure, and a little bit morale-wise because that was such a big get for you a year ago. So that's unfortunate it worked out that way. Maybe Texas Tech is better off. Maybe Micah Hudson's better off. I hope it works out for both sides. But, yeah, that's a blow.
Saw this from Scotty B in the chat room that Pete Nako's reporting that offensive coordinator Zach Kitley has emerged as the top candidate for the FAU job, which, of course, had Tom Herman. He has been at Tech, obviously, offensive coordinator at Western Kentucky with that great offense that they've had, and also at Houston Baptist.
Well, it sounds like Red Raiders fans better buckle up for a crazy offseason. I mean, you've already had 2 defensive coaches getting fired, which was a needed thing to happen. Then Micah Hudson news drops pretty shortly in that same time frame, and that's obviously not a positive story. But, yeah, now the rumors about that and whatever else is headed their way, buckle up because it's already starting off pretty wild for Texas Tech fans. So,
I saw Kim Coulter saying something about a lot of hope in here today for Tech to suffer harm. And then, of course, he does ROFL.
Do you know who I would hire if I were Joey McGuire right now at Texas Tech? Neil Brown.
Yeah, I think Neil Brown's going to get an OC call before he gets a head coaching call. Yeah. I said that earlier. I don't know that he'll be a head coach again next year, but I do think that it makes all the sense in the world he could be an OC in a variety of places. So, yeah, that wouldn't shock me. And I think there's some background there with Lubbock, so that would make some sense as well. But, yeah, that's going to be an interesting well, if that opens up, the defensive coordinator job's what they've got to actually hire right now. That's the one that's actually open. So we'll see on Keeler. There's a lot of rumors flying around right now, but that's at least something to take note of for sure.
Katie Rader, T, see you, Zach, bye, no tears.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like some people would be
50 points a week.
Yeah, true, but it's also you need what is it called perspective on those 50 points sometimes too. But yeah, no, like that's a guy who, if he were to leave, there would be a segment of the Red Raider fan base that would be more than happy with that. And so we'll see if they're not changing both coordinators, but we know at least defensively that's the direction they're heading right now. So Joey's got a lot of work to do.
We have Ari Temkin, Big 12 Radio at 3:40 today. I said Jet Drenning, who covers West Virginia, sideline analyst, will join us at 4:30. Phil Bennett today at 5. We'll also hear from Scott Drew. We mentioned if Micah Hudson had like things to grab onto, like stats. Kevin Concepcion of NC State. Wow, 2 years there, 1,655 yards, 18 touchdowns. He has entered the portal from the Wolfpack.
Can I be a crystal ball guy right now? Can I do that?
There's nothing anybody can. I mean, honestly.
I'm going to do this. Kansas State. His brother's going to Kansas State.
Oh, okay.
I would say that Kansas State's got a great shot at him. Although, here's what Kansas State's going to have to deal with. Unless he's already decided that that's where he wants to go, because he is so freaking good that they have to contend with everybody who wants a wide receiver, because he is that good. And Grayson McCall transferred there, had to medically retire. Then after that, NC State season, which defensively was already off the rails, went completely off the rails for Dave Doran. And this is not a surprise. So he's going to be in the water, and a lot of people are going to want him a lot.
He's a numbers crunch, big time stats. That's what you're looking for. And yeah, maybe K-State will have a chance to land him.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a really productive dude going in the portal. It'll have a lot of suitors. He'll be one of hundreds of others now that we're going to be talking about. So, yeah, there's just another guy to pay note of. And if there is a chance for Kansas State because of that brother connection, then that would be fantastic for Chris Kleiman and company, who obviously didn't end the year the way they wanted to. We'll have a little bit of a kind of a – not a rebound this offseason, but kind of a regrouping, I feel like. They've got some good pieces, but I think there's still like a lot that they need to kind of figure out there. So maybe that's one of the pieces they go and get to help out their talented quarterback. But, yeah, that's another name to make note of. And I know a bunch of others we're going to get to, but, Micah Hudson, 8 catches, 123 yards. That was his stats this year.
No, I mentioned it. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
That was it. In 5 games, he registered catches. So that's not something that's going to probably turn a lot of heads, but if you know his recruiting story, then he's still going to, no matter what records he put up this year, going to have a lot of people coming after him as well. So, yeah, there will be a mix of guys, and those two will be right there near the top.
Washington State offensive coordinator Ben Arbuckle headed to Oklahoma to be their new offensive coordinator. There was somebody else, another team that thought Utah. And Oklahoma probably put out more money for him, and because he can. They have a bigger program, and boy, do they need somebody to help them on offense.
And it depends, so what does that mean for John Mateer? It depends on what, they decide to do about Jackson Arnold, who I really don't know, Craig, and you have a better perspective on this than me. I mean, just watching him, I'm not sure if it was his problem or the fact that they needed a better system, and they were, besieged by injuries doesn't even begin to cover what happened to that offense this year.
All I know is he's taking off running again. I mean, that's just what it feels like every time I watch him. Is he's just always like snap, take a couple steps back, take off running, because he doesn't have guys open, or because there's pressure, or because he just doesn't know what to do other than that. I don't know what the future holds for Jackson Arnold, but if they were to say, hey, Jackson, we're going to go a different direction, I think he'd probably be fine with that at this point, because he might be the one that broaches that conversation. He might be the one that says, hey, I'm looking for a different change in direction here. I don't know. I could see both parties walking away and being happy with that, but we'll see what Ben Arbuckle has to say. That was a name that was floating around. Utah, I saw some reports that they were actually favored, and it's hard to sort through all the BS on social media, so I don't know if that was people trolling or what, but I did see a couple of posts that Utah maybe had the inside track on Ben Arbuckle, so clearly that wasn't the case, or Oklahoma made an offer there late and flipped the percentages. Whatever it was, I think they made a pretty good hire based on what we know about Ben Arbuckle. That was a name that seemed to excite a lot of people, and yeah, he did some fun things with John Mateer this year, so if Mateer wants to head to Norman and they feel like the Jackson Arnold era is not worth prolonging, then I think that would make a lot of sense. I don't know, how he fits in terms of his style, but I think he'd fit in pretty well in the SEC. Kind of Diego Pavia, kind of a little bit type of attitude, style, being able to run the ball. Just, I don't know. He's a fiery guy. I enjoyed watching him this year up in Pullman, and so yeah, he'd be an attractive guy to bring along as well. But if not, then
he's not in the portal yet either. So
yeah, if not, he'll have a lot of people coming after him. We haven't heard the last of John Mateer one way or the other.
Yeah.
Garrett, can we go straight to Weisner? Is that possible? I know you got a slideshow.
Let me run just down a list of some other transfers real quick while we're on this, so I don't miss them. Caden Salter, Liberty, plus two of their two best offensive linemen. They're in the portal, which I think might be an indicator of Jamie Chadwell might actually be getting his due. Well, we'll see.
But I think it's also an indicator that Caden Salter did not have a very good year at all. He followed up what was a banner year with an awful year, and plenty of people at Liberty who are glad to turn the page as well. So take that how you will. He's a talented player, but that was way off this year. Just that whole combination of Caden Salter and Liberty, that was really disappointing.
Yeah. Parker Jenkins, 4-star recruit last year for Houston, ran for 464 yards as a freshman. He is in the portal.
Miller Moss
is in the portal as well. I think he should go to Michigan, do 1 year at Michigan with what should be a pretty good group of skill players around him, and then make way for Bryce Underwood there. But Jordan White from Liberty's he's a center. He started his college career at West Virginia. He's a grad transfer. Xavier Gray, also there. New NC State linebacker Wyatt Wright, who was the top JUCO linebacker last year. Kansas State losing linebacker Cam Salas, who's from Kennedale, Texas. He was a freshman this year. Let's see. There's one other big name I wanted to say here, and there's been so many.
We can come back to it.
Yeah,
Craig,
so there's
you want to
there's
add
a
anything
lot,
to there? Then we got to get to one or two more stories.
Yeah, I wanted to add on Parker Jenkins that it was interesting to see his trio of representatives in the tweet that Matt Zenit sent out, the 3 agents that he has for a guy who didn't even run for 500 yards this past year. It was just interesting to see his vast representation. But that's the era that we live in nowadays. So those people get shout-outs. I could do without that personally, but you got to, I guess, put out there who's representing these guys. So if people need to contact them, there's just, I guess, another way to go about it is they're their agents. But, yeah, that was just kind of a side-eye kind of odd thing for me to see was here's his 3 people representing him. It's like, what did he even do last year? I mean, I get it. The money's flowing, but just odd nonetheless.
Yeah. Okay, here are the 2. Because they were related to Baylor. Zach Pyron, who's the backup at Georgia Tech, was committed to Baylor and
out
then
of
flipped.
Alabama.
And he is entering the portal with 2 years left as a grad transfer. Jacob Zeno, looking to play a 7th year, is transferring from UAB. 17-game starter, 5,025 total yards and 36 TDs over 3 seasons.
He's a guy who could play somewhere. I mean, he put up some pretty good numbers with UAB, and I think he got hurt. And, of course, they were terrible. Trent Dilford. Is he still the head coach? I'm surprised that he hadn't been fired
He's
yet.
still the head coach. Yeah. Jalen Kitna's the quarterback there towards the end of the year. John Kitna's son, who was a Florida signee, and you can look into what happened there if you want to, but eventually landed at UAB, and he was the guy down the stretch. So good luck to Jacob. I mean, I thought he had a pretty good year last year, and this year was – pretty disappointing for whatever reasons there were in play, like injuries, but it was disappointing nonetheless. So not sure what his market looks like, but good for him to give it one more go, I suppose.
I don't. Parker Jenkins, how many yards did you say he had, Paul?
464.
Okay, there must be in his first 6 games of the year, first 5 or 6 games of the year, he had 17 carries for 34 yards.
He had 34 yards this year.
Yeah, that's 17
464 yards total.
Career in 2 years. 17 carries for 34 yards. And then this young man, we saw him when he was a pup. Contravan Weisner was known as Trey when he was at Waco at Conley High School. We did the games his sophomore year. Explosive. Transferred to DeSoto his senior year. He was absolutely freakish in that game against A&M when UT controlled both the offense and defensive lines and dominated that game. It was much the fact that it was 17-7 is weird because of a couple of crazy turnovers. He had himself a month. He had a big game against Kentucky. He was a skinny little kid that could run, and now he's into a grown man mode, and UT needed it because of the injuries on the offensive line.
You know, it's funny. During the game the other night, Chris Fowler was talking about Contravan Weisner, comparing to C.J. Baxter, and he's like, not as highly touted or maybe not as – I'm like, yeah, but –
Baxter was a 5-star.
I was like, you guys, sometimes that stuff can be a little. You guys are now just seeing him play what we saw early on. So take your stars and shove them in a sack sometimes because we saw him. At the beginning of his career, and he had that kind of potential. And then he obviously left Conley, went to DeSoto. Where at DeSoto, a guy like Contravan Weisner, he's just another one of the dudes. So maybe you kind of fall into the pack there, but. Clearly showing that Texas can lose as many running backs as it can. Yeah. And they just had, they still had Jaden Blue and they still had Weisner. And Weisner, surprisingly to me, was the more accomplished of those two this year. But Blue is pretty damn good, too.
Jaden Blue still also. Both of them very good catching the ball out of the backfield, too.
First of all, that game was immensely disappointing from a competition standpoint. Like, all the pageantry and everything was great to see. The Kyle Field faithful and the Burnt Orange faithful showed up in droves, and all that was cool. I'm sure we'll talk about that at some point. But the actual game itself was pretty disappointing, even though A&M had a late spark that looked like it could maybe make it interesting, but it didn't really. And a big part of the reason why was because they couldn't stop Contravan Weisner on defense. He was amazing. You could have told me he was going to be a 5-star when we watched him as a sophomore. I would have totally believed that. I didn't keep track of him as much after we stopped covering their games other than just to see the numbers he kept putting up. And I still feel like he was a 5-star talent. So I don't know, how the analysts and all the people that do those rankings viewed it to where he was. But if you would have planted 5 stars next to his name as just a sophomore at Connolly, I would have been right there to vouch for that and defend that. And I'm not surprised at all, guys. I was surprised he wasn't playing more based on what we saw a couple years ago. I thought he was one of the best players I've ever seen at the high school level in terms of just being silky smooth and just gliding for yards and getting tough when he needed to. And I thought he was one of the better players I've ever seen, like I said. And so when he signed with Texas as an Oklahoma fan, I was like, damn it, man, because I know how good he is. And I'm sitting there watching it with my brother-in-law the other night, and we're talking about Jaden Blue and all these other guys. I'm like, Contravan Weisner's like that guy. Like, I don't care who else they've signed. I don't care what the stars next to their names are. Like, I've always been of the belief that's the dude right there. And I don't know what all came into play, just other talent in the room, injuries, whatever, that took a while for him to get to being like the bell cow guy, but he's pretty clearly like that guy now, and he has been for the last couple of games, and he's been amazing to watch, and I'm glad for him. He's a hell of a talent, and UT's got a really good one, as everybody across the country saw on Saturday night.